Hi, everyone. Thank you for attending our Questline webinar on how to segment customer communications to increase revenue and satisfaction. My name is Maureen Murphy, and I'm the technical producer of today's webinar. Before we begin, we want to cover a few housekeeping items. To the left of your screen are multiple application widgets you can use. Most of the widgets are resizable and movable, so feel free to move them around to get the most of your desktop space. If you have any questions during the webcast, you can submit them through the Q&A widget, which is directly below the presentation window. We will try to answer all questions during the webcast, but if a more in-depth answer is needed or we run out of time, they will be answered later via email. Some networks may cause slides to advance more slowly than others, so logging off your VPN is recommended. If your slides do fall behind, pushing F5 on your keyboard will refresh the page. If you do experience any other disruptions during the broadcast, please use the Q&A widget for any technical questions. We will be sending everyone a follow-up email within the next few days, which will include a PDF of the PowerPoint presentation and the playback link to the recording of today's webinar. We will also be conducting poll questions during the presentation and would greatly appreciate your participation. Please be aware that you are not the only participant today. The names of the other attendees are not being shown to you for privacy. Now, let me introduce today's host. Mike Carter is a senior engineer for Questline. Mike has a bachelor's in engineering and an MBA degree from The Ohio State University. He is also a certified energy manager. At Questline, Mike writes articles for newsletters, answers Ask an Expert inquiries, and develops webinars on energy topics. And now I'll go ahead and turn it over to Mike, who will introduce our guests and get things started for us today.
Well, thank you, Maureen, and welcome to another webinar in our Plugged In series. This month's topic is customer satisfaction. And as shown in our agenda, we're going to discuss today what it means to segment customers and the positive impact it can have on your business from doing so. Then we'll share some examples of behavioral messaging from companies outside the utility space. We'll also share 4 specific segmentation opportunities for energy utilities. Finally, we'll introduce the value of artificial intelligence-driven customer personas and a 6-step process for creating and utilizing data-driven personas. In between, you'll have a chance to answer some insightful poll questions. We'll share the answers with everyone, so be sure to participate. But before we begin, though, let me introduce our speakers for today. Brian Lindamood is Assistant Vice President of Marketing and Content Strategy at Questline. Brian leads the team that delivers engaging, educational content solutions and digital marketing campaigns. Previously, Brian was Director of Content Marketing for Manta Media, one of the largest online communities for small business owners, where he worked to empower business owners with expert advice and educational resources around digital marketing. Alison Alvarez is CEO and co-founder of Blastpoint, a customer intelligence software company based in Pittsburgh. Alison is an expert in the fields of geospatial data analysis and computer science and has built technology tools for the utility, automotive, retail, media, and banking industries. She's also a National Science Foundation Research Fellow, a Jack Kent Cook Fellow, and a Schwartz Entrepreneurial Fellow. And she served as an advisor to Y Combinator's Valor Water Analytics. An author and renowned public speaker, Alvarez holds a Master of Science degree from the Language Technologies Institute at Carnegie Mellon University School of Computer Science and a Master of Business Administration from CMU's Tepper School of Business. Now I'm going to launch the first of 4 polls today. And as you can see here, the question is, to what degree do you presently segment customer communications? Maybe you don't segment at all and really have no plans to do so at this time. Or maybe you segment customers all the time and use multiple measures. Or maybe you fall somewhere in between. We give you 5 choices. Please pick the one that most characterizes your utility situation today with regard to customer segmentation. While you're doing so, I want to just remind you, anytime during the webinar, click the question mark icon box. You can submit any questions you have about material we're covering today, or customer segmentation in general, or even digital communications in general. We'd be happy to answer those at the end today. Looks like you're still answering. I'll just give a couple more seconds here, and I'll share those results. You haven't slowed down yet. I really appreciate your participation in our polls. Really makes it very helpful to kind of get a feel for where everyone's at on our subject matter today. All right, I think most of you have answered, so I'm pushing those results out. And of course, by far the biggest area says, well, you're doing some segmentation, maybe small business and compared to managed key account segments. And then it's kind of scattered a little bit of everything else. So I think you'll find some great value then in today's presentation. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alison. So, I'm sorry, to Brian. And so our first speaker, Brian Lindamood. So Brian, take control.
Great, thank you, Mike. And thanks again to Alison for joining us today, and thanks to all of you for your interest in this topic. So everybody's different, right? Every one of our customers is unique. I'm sure we all know that. That's why we're interested in segmentation. So let's think about it this way. If Mike were to put up another poll asking all of us what our favorite movie is, I bet we would get 100 different answers. And that would be interesting, but not really that useful, right? Like, what would you do with a list of 100 different movies? But what if instead we organize the list by our favorite movie genres? So instead of a list of 100 completely different and seemingly random movies, we have a list of 5 different movie genres. Now we can see that 10% of us like romantic comedies, 10% of us like dramas, 5% like vampire movies for some reason, and 75% like science fiction, of course. So now we can see the trends. We can see the meaning in this seemingly random group of 100 people. And that's what customer segmentation is. By identifying the interests of your customers, by identifying their motivations, and then organizing them into groups or segments, we can act on that information. Now we can address each segment with information we know will be relevant to them. But why? Why bother going to the trouble of segmenting your customers just so you can send them each a different message? I mean, that sounds like more work to me, right? Why not just send them all the same message? Well, the short answer is your customers expect to receive relevant messages. Especially these days, companies like Netflix, Amazon, Google are very good at this sort of thing. They are setting the standard for effective digital relationships. And by the way, your customers are also customers of Netflix, Amazon, and Google. You know, your customers know what a digital relationship looks like, and they expect the same from their energy provider. And you know, add to this general feeling people have of being strapped for time or being overwhelmed by the number of messages waiting for them in their inbox. You know, people don't want to waste time with messages that they're not interested in. The good news is customers will read a message that they think is relevant. And these numbers from MailChimp show that segmented email messages deliver a 23% higher open rate and a 49% higher click-through rate. We've actually seen very similar numbers in Questline's own performance metrics. We've measured a 22% increase in open rate and 44% increase in CTR. Segmentation will increase engagement. The numbers show that. Customers will pay attention when you send them a relevant message that speaks to their specific interests. And if there's a call to action, if you're looking for a program sign up or other conversion, that will increase as well. So instead of just blasting the same message to all of your customers and hoping you randomly find the right ones, you know, you might get lucky. Instead, you can send a targeted message just to customers who are most interested in that program and speak to their specific motivation. Take luck out of the equation. Ultimately, as we've seen, you know, when customers see that you understand them, when you build a digital relationship based on your customer's interests, that is the foundation for strong customer satisfaction. So I want to touch on a few topics that are related to segmentation, but not quite the same thing. It's important to understand the relationship between these things, but also not get confused by the differences. So personalization is when you send a unique message to each individual customer. Think back to the movie example. We can take that list of 100 different movies and send 100 unique messages. Maybe we're making recommendations. So if your favorite movie is Rushmore, you should also check out the Royal Tenenbaums. And each one of us would get a different message. With segmentation by comparison, we would send just 5 different emails organized by groups. So 20 of us would get a message saying, if your favorite genre is quirky comedies, you should check out Rushmore and the Royal Tenenbaums. Now, the goal is the same. You want to increase engagement with relevant content, but the tactics are a little different from segmentation. You're sending 100 unique emails or 1,000 unique emails with personalization versus just 5 unique emails to reach 5 segments. This is an example from Goodreads, the book recommendation site. These are 2 different emails received by 2 different people here at Questline at the same time. And as you can see, the emails are totally different, right? The emails are personalized based on the books each individual likes. And presumably every single person on Goodreads' list gets a unique email with recommendations that are totally different just for them. This is an example of the monthly newsletter that Google sends to Nest users. It includes personalized energy use reporting unique to that customer, along with an explanation and efficiency advice that's relevant to them. And by the way, just as a side note, and I've said this before, you should be paying attention that Google is sending a monthly energy newsletter to your customers. This is a relationship that you want to own with your customers. This is a really interesting example from Axios, which is a news outlet that sends a lot of different newsletters. So this is an example of segmentation, but it gives the appearance of personalization. On this page, customers can sign up to receive any or all of 25 different newsletters. These 25 lists are segments because it groups all of the customers who are interested in each topic. It's not personalization, but by allowing customers to opt in to these groups, by letting them choose what they're interested in, it feels personalized. It's segmentation that feels unique to each customer. And I think this would be a really good approach for energy utility newsletters. Behavioral messaging is another tactic that's not quite segmentation, although it could support a segmentation strategy. A behavioral message is an email or a text that is automatically triggered by customer action. The classic example is the abandoned cart email. If you visit an e-commerce site, put a product in your shopping cart, but then leave it there without completing the purchase, you know that you're going to get an email asking if you forgot something, right? This is an automatic message that was triggered by a behavior, which was leaving something in your cart. Now, you can also build segments this way. So imagine that you send an article about electric vehicles to every customer on your newsletter list. And then any customer who reads that article gets a behavioral message, an automatic follow-up with information about your EV rebate program. Now you have a list of everyone who read that email. That's your segment of customers who are interested in EVs. Here's a behavioral email from Abercrombie. Someone was shopping for pants, and now they've received recommendations. Maybe they didn't complete the purchase because they didn't know about all these different styles and colors. If Abercrombie wanted to, of course, they could also use this information to create a segment of customers who are looking for pants. And then this is from another retailer, section 119. And this is a classic abandoned cart email, again, automatically triggered by the customer's behavior of not completing the purchase. So a few good examples from other industries. Let's talk about how energy utilities can benefit from customer segmentation. E-bill adoption campaigns really lend themselves well to this approach. That's because the motivations, the reasons a customer would sign up for paperless billing are relatively limited, but strong and important. So they're easy to define and really important for those customers who are looking for those motivations. Some customers want to go paperless because they want to save trees. Others are motivated by convenience and just want to save time. When you identify those motivations, when you create those segments and then send messages to each group of customers that speak to those motivations, you can increase conversion rates by sending those relevant messages. We're currently working on an e-bill campaign like this with Blastpoint for an IOU in the Midwest. That's one reason I was so happy that Alison could join us today. I think it's a really great example of Blastpoint's ability to identify customer segments, the AI technology they apply to that, and then the approach Questline takes to create messages that appeal to those segments. So it has been a great collaboration working with Blastpoint on that. Other opportunities. So I cited a couple examples from e-commerce sites. If you have a marketplace at your utility, you should be doing the same thing. And this could be as simple as an abandoned cart email or more targeted like recommended products. If a customer buys a smart home device from your marketplace, send them recommendations for other compatible devices to add to their smart home. Or if a newsletter reader watches a video about smart thermostats, send a behavioral message with a rebate offer and a link to your marketplace, and then use that information to build your segment of customers who are interested in smart thermostats. Welcome series is a great way to start a customer relationship on the right foot, but not every new customer is the same. Residential customers have different needs and concerns than business customers. Customers who are new to your utility have different questions than existing customers who are moving within your service territory. We always recommend segmenting these welcome messages so you can provide the most relevant information to each of those groups. And email newsletters. So I showed a few examples from other industries. This is becoming a more common approach as newsletters grow in popularity in general, and I think really important for utilities to pay attention to. So when you think about your residential newsletter list, those customers have a lot of different interests. A general newsletter sent to everyone is going to interest some customers some of the time, but you're going to miss out on a lot of potential engagement by not sending content that's relevant to targeted segments all of the time. You can imagine the value, for example, of a smart home newsletter that speaks to customers who are interested in electrification and energy efficiency. Or electric vehicles. A segment of current EV owners would be a very powerful audience, not just to share information about EV charging or other advice, but also to introduce to those customers in a very targeted way related programs like demand response or time of use billing options. When it comes to business customers, they may be even more time-strapped than residential customers. You know, business customers are definitely not going to waste time with content they don't think is relevant. And we have found that segmenting by industry for a business newsletter makes a huge difference. For AEP Ohio, we created segments based on targeted industries in their service territory, separate newsletters for healthcare, manufacturing, education, and so on. The appeal of that should be obvious, right? You know, the energy needs of a healthcare facility are much different than a manufacturer. With a segmented newsletter, we can provide relevant content about each industry's concerns and not annoy customers with information that's not relevant to their facility. The performance metrics bear this out. The healthcare segment had an 84% increase in engagement compared to the unsegmented newsletter. Education had a 54% increase. Overall, we saw a 22% higher open rate and a 44% higher click-through rate for the segmented newsletters compared to the unsegmented. It shows customers want to engage with relevant content, and segmentation is a really effective way to deliver that. Thanks again for attending today, and thank you for your interest, and I will turn it back over to Mike.
Well, thank you, Brian, for that excellent primer on customer segmentation. We're going to open up our second poll for today. Question is, what is the biggest barrier to customer segmentation for your energy utility? Maybe it's something to do with the quality of your email lists, or maybe it's an issue of having content available. Maybe you just don't have the resources to handle customer segmentation, or maybe you're just not quite sure where to start. So we got 4 choices. Let us know which of those really resonates with your utility. What do you think is that biggest barrier to your utility for doing more with customer segmentation, applying customer segmentation principles to your communications? While you're doing that, we wait for your answers. Again, just a reminder, if you have any questions about what Brian shared in his part of the discussion today, just type your questions, click on the icon with the question mark, and type your questions in that Q&A text box, and we'll address those here in just a little while. So, getting a lot of answers still coming in on this particular question. I think it's a very insightful question, and I think we're going to be surprised at the answer. So I'm going to share that in just a second. Looks like people are winding up. So yeah, here we go. All of the above. So yeah, each one of these can and evidently is a barrier to customer segmentation. Appreciate your answers on that. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alison, continue on. And Alison, go ahead and share how creating and using data-driven personas can be valuable to utilities.
Thank you so much for having me here today. And I loved everything that Brian had to say. Super relevant to all of us doing our jobs. As that poll really showed us, I think there's a real diversity in what's keeping us from using segmentation to provide a more consistent and personalized experience for our customers. And honestly, the reason I found Blastpoint was to find a way to make that stuff more accessible. And I think a lot of us are working with what we've got when it comes to resources. We saw that with the poll, with what we've got when it comes to data resources. And our whole goal is to work with what you got as much as you can. And so I'm going to talk about what Brian was discussing about segmentation, and we're just going to take it to the next dimension. So not just segmentation for doing your, understanding who your customers are one time. Basically, understanding your customers as they grow, as they change. What we really want to do is facilitate lifelong relationships with customers. So you're not going to talk to them just one time. You're not just going to have one touch point. And if you're really successful at what you're doing, you're going to have a relationship with customers that you're going to come back to continuously. And it's about taking every point of contact with that customer and making it the best point of contact possible, and not only providing value to our company partners, but also providing value to their customers. And, I want to say, why are we even doing this in the first place? Because, as we can see, everyone's dealing with low resources. Nobody has enough staff. Nobody has enough time. And the whole idea of AI-driven personas is to take advantage of the data resources you have and find new sources of value in them and make them work smarter, not harder. So you can engage with your customers as they grow and change throughout their lifetime. You can find customers who make ideal partners for new offerings, and find customers who are reliable payers, who might make sense for additional programs. For the last year, we've been working with utilities, especially when it comes to dealing with the COVID crisis. So understanding what's going on with households individually and being proactive when we see them struggle. And, what's been really interesting is seeing this happen at a macroeconomic level and looking within neighborhoods and seeing this rooftop is fine, this rooftop needs help, and directing that help in a specialized way that makes sense for that customer where they're most likely to take it. And finally, what we're looking at is making your own internal processes and turning your team into the best version of themselves. So not only removing data silos so everyone has access to data and can use all the resources that are available, but really backing up ROI, because your boss is going to be like, how good was this? What were you able to do for me? And so if you're able to, from an analytic level, quantify ROI not only now but into the future, it's a big win for the organization because it helps not only the immediate future but also looking at long-term planning. And especially with our customers who are in the automotive and utility industry, they think about things in terms of decades. And so you need that time to do everything you need to do. So it means acting proactively and looking into the future. So let's just talk about what these are really quickly, because I think, based on the polls, it sounds like a lot of people are using segmentation, might be using personas already. And if you put personas in place, you know that they can be a lot of work. And so a lot of what we're doing is using computer systems to do a lot of that work for you. And honestly, what it can do is look through the data in ways that are eliminate sources of bias and build a coherent picture. So a lot of what we do is we look at your internal data. Where it makes sense, we'll bring in third-party data. So sometimes we'll end up with profiles of thousands of data points on customers, so we know really what makes them tick. They're, like I said before, they're at that rooftop level, because even if you look at a zip code or a city, not everybody's the same, and you want to treat them like individuals so they feel spoken to and heard. We use all kinds of data. I think the most powerful is media and channel preferences. So you not only know what to say to customers, you know where to find them, where they're going to be. Because for some customers, email makes sense. For some, texting makes sense. For others, you're going to want to send them a piece of mail. So understanding those pathways is really important to making every bit of communication as effective as possible. Because again, nobody has enough time, nobody has enough personnel to do everything they want to do. So efficiency really, really matters. So we're able to look at response rates, so we grow and change models as people change. And we're going to talk about that more in the context of innovation adoption. What we look at are, not just scoring customers, so understanding who's the best fit for things, but also not doing, for example, one size fits all for customers. So understanding who makes what sense for what channels, what messaging, so that everything is maximal efficiency, but you're not writing an individual email one by one to customers. You're taking advantage of commonalities in your customer base to reach out to them in a way that's going to be the most effective way possible. And honestly, another part of it is not talking to people when they're not going to listen to you, so you don't waste your time. Just talking about results, we've been doing this for a while. We've managed to be really effective with our customers. I've been talking about COVID. One of the most important things we did was, for people who are struggling, who's really struggling and who just needs a nudge. And if you just know who needs a nudge, you're able to, for example, use excess time in your call center to reach out to those good payer customers so that you can get them back on track as quickly as possible. Or, for example, using customer assistance programs to incentivize customers to make on-time payments. With the moratoriums in place in 22 states in the last year, not everybody had an incentive to pay, but these assistance programs will cap payments, so people really have incentives to join it and make at least some payments, so that the debt level that utilities are carrying is at least somewhat mitigated by putting people on these programs. And we've done lots of things like paperless billing, helping people find EV rates and spread EV. Paperless billing is incredibly popular because there's a direct ROI with that. Every time you mail somebody, it costs you some amount of money. And just looking at postal savings alone over the lifetime, if you switch people off of e-billing, it's more than $50 for most households. And that even includes increased call center costs potentially. And so that there's a really quick, easy wins, and even just moving the needle by 5% honestly can shake out to meaning literally millions of dollars in savings, which will help with revenue ops long term. So, we're looking at things, in the big sense to the small sense. So we want to think about using segmentation for every single touch point. So, I think a lot of our customers approach things from that high level segmentation level. So they might already have a bird's eye view of what customers are and how they tick. We definitely operate in that way as well. But I think the place where we're really helpful is sort of down the line. So looking at things for initiatives. So you have internal goals that you have to meet. You have new services you want to put in place. You've got big goals, but they're tied to really specific things. So maybe it's energy efficiency, maybe it's people getting into electric vehicles. So looking at that, we can find, using AI, customers that are best fit. From there, we can also look at micro personas. So that's not only looking at not just EVs, but who wants a specific kind of EV charger, or who wants a specific kind of EV charger next month, 6 months from now, a year from now. So looking at those tinier slices can help you sort of organize how you're going to talk to customers, what you're going to say, when you're going to say it. And, for a lot of our customers, especially the utilities, we're talking about customer footprints that include millions of households. And it's really hard to get to know customers on an individual basis. And let's face it, in this day of customer service, driven by the internet, people expect more than they did before. And so the way that we support that is by providing individual information on each and every household, because, looking at my own neighborhood, we've got people who are doing just great living right next door to people who are struggling. And if you know what's going on with people on an individual basis, you can be a lot more effective in talking to that individual household where they are. And that's the name of the game with what we're doing. And so I want to break down our process really quick. So, we look at building goals, so understanding what we're doing overall, putting that together so that we can get the most out of the data that you have, plus whatever you can bring in from the outside if you need it, building personas that support that, using that in your own internal initiatives to make them supercharged. So that means making them more efficient, saving money, making things take less time, being more effective. Taking those wins, but learning from them, both your successes and failures, and using them to sort of build this cycle. So we're talking about this over the lifetime of a customer. And so things are going to change. All the models you should use should be changing on a regular basis so that you understand what's going on with people. And I don't think this is any more clear than in the last year, where people went from being in one place in March to a completely different place in April. And if you were not ready to address that, you missed a lot of opportunities. So let's sort of look at this process in depth. So first thing, establishing goals. And I think a lot of us come with like a strong identity of who our organization is, what our goals are, what our values are. And so it's basically taking those and condensing them into a set of goals of what you want to achieve. So not only do you want to know, how long do we have to do this? What are our internal regulatory pressures to make sure that we hit them? What are our internal business rules that we must make sure that we adhere to? It's also knowing benchmarks. So not only how well are we doing now without segmentation, but where do we need to reach to make this worthwhile? So the first process is establishing all of that. Next, we're looking at basically making that data work for you. Like I said, work smarter, not harder. So that means, if you're familiar with data quality, that means doing that entire process so it makes the data standardized in a way that machines have no problem reading it. And the one thing I say to pretty much all of our customers is, like, I've worked with banks in like Latin America that have IT infrastructure from the 70s. And so I've always seen worse when it comes to any kind of data. We can work with pretty much anything out there. And once we have an assessment of what's there, how we can enhance it, we can look at those AI patterns that we can unlock with the power of AI. And, I know I sound like, ooh, AI, it's this, big fancy thing. I think what we're really banking on is the strength of sample size when it comes to especially dealing with our utility customers, because there's just a lot to see in that data at that volume. And so there's just a lot to pull out of it, a lot of value. There's, we would call it as acreage. If you're going to mine, you're going to find something if you have enough acreage. It might be diamonds, it might be bauxite, but it's going to be something that's going to provide value. And then once we have that, we can use that to build data clusters. So, those are those personas that we're talking about, so that you can reach out to people according to what their needs are, but kind of in a mass market way, where it's, individualized to the individual household, but you're not writing, a million different messages. You're putting everybody into the category so that you are working efficiently and hitting everybody's high notes. And I want to make one comment about data security, because, again, I come from a banking background. I live a life of security, paranoia about data security. So every single organization should absolutely have high standards here, no question, because this is our future. We're always in an arms race against, people who don't want this data to be safe. And on top of that, there's going to be more and more data requirements on top of this for reporting. So if you look at GDPR in Europe, being able to give people information on how your algorithms are being used, that's extremely important. And so everything we build is designed to support these goals and protect our customers, protect not them only now, but like make sure that, that as this infrastructure ages, we are keeping it safe. So now we're looking at, these AI-driven personas. So, we're most of us are familiar with personas. So this idea of bringing people to life. And if you know what makes someone tick, it's a lot easier to relate to them. And I know, especially in the utility industry, I know historically, I've heard customers being called, for example, load on the system. And I think what makes the current generation different right now is that's not how they think about their customers. And so these personas are there to help support the human part of interacting with end users and customers. So not only creating a platform where you can dive in and look at this data, but building these customer reports. So like not only does your team understand who they're working with, it's stuff that can be socialized to the organization because you have stakeholders for every single thing you do. And so making that stakeholder information digestible, easy to distribute is going to help you achieve your goals. And finally, you guys, I saw the email lists and how difficult they are to work with. So it's building, a better list that either we can put in your hands via a spreadsheet or connect directly to what, for example, with Questline, to connect directly with your customer. So we have a full pipeline there. Finally, it's putting this stuff to work. Whether it's marketing, sales, finding customers, talking to customers in a way that they will listen, which we all know is incredibly difficult. For customer service, a lot of our customers are incredibly interested in this right now because, having a better experience ultimately means that it's just easier to get your message out. And it's something that creates a better relationship with customers overall, which if you can act proactively in crises, will mean managing big potential problems down the road, whether it's infrastructure or whether it's just dealing with the difficulty in billings. Product ops and strategy, so introducing new services, new products, thinking long-term. This is, I think, where we really shine because like I've been saying this whole presentation, people don't stay the same their whole lifetime. They grow, they change, and you want to make sure whatever your offerings you have are there to meet those customers. And we talk about this especially with electrical vehicles. It's brand new technology, and you're thinking in an order of decades. Where do you put infrastructure to support this technology, to support people not going to the gas station, to refueling from the grid? That's a serious change in how people relate to transportation and relate to their own electrical grid. So being prepared for that is incredibly, incredibly important. So looking ahead to the future is the key here. Just thinking about operationalizing this, like putting this data to work for you. I know this tree looks crazy, but it actually shows how one of our customers is in real life using AI-driven personas to manage how they relate to customers. So every single one of those yellow boxes are basically that end action level. So they're building lists out of customers based on what they need, and they're going out and proactively communicating with them in a way that's going to, if you think about people struggling to pay their bills, there's a point where they owe you enough money that they're going to stop talking to you. And everything about this tree is built to keep people communicating with you, even if they're in trouble, and keep people on board, because the utility industry writes off something between 1% and 3% of their billings every single year. For my individual customers, that adds up to tens of millions of dollars. For the industry as a whole, it's literally billions of dollars that are lost, that could potentially be rerouted, even if we're talking just like a few percentage points, it's a huge amount of money that's out there that can be managed by thinking about this communication ahead of time. And finally, get those wins. I want to talk about one number on this slide in particular, which is that 650% increase in customer engagement. We see this regularly in partnership with Questline. And we see that because, and it's really funny because this number, like it's something we see in practice. We've seen it multiple times, and it actually matches studies that say that when you personalize, for example, email, you can expect an almost 7-fold increase in the amount of engagement you get. And it's really interesting that we can do that, and we can verify those studies using this actual technology, which is just, I'm a science nerd, so this is my favorite thing. The other thing I want to say about this is that you should not have to wait years to get results from this stuff. And the fun part about doing AI-driven personas and having that ROI is what to do first, where that low-hanging fruit is, where to get results immediately. And that's something that you can realize by using, your own data infrastructure without adding too much to it. And, just to wrap up, I love this slide because it's like, you graduate from school, you enter sort of the adult world where you're paying bills, all the way up to where you're thinking about your kids and your grandkids about the future. And there's a whole lifetime of customer engagement that we all have in front of us. And being able to understand people, being able to go with them on that journey, whether it's highs or lows, and being able to talk to them from where they are at that moment. Are they at a point where they're thinking about changing? Are they going to churn out of something? Can you do something to prevent that? Or are they thinking about making a change? Are they going to upgrade their vehicle? Does it make sense for them to have an EV? And by understanding the pathway, the journey that people are on, it's so much easier to reach people, relate to them. One of the results we've gotten is doubling the effectiveness of electrical vehicle outreach. And we've done this both at for automotive companies, and we've done it for utility companies. And you do that by understanding how innovation spreads, how viral it is. But you do that also by understanding, in those individual households, what are the conversations they're having around the dinner table? Buying a car is an emotional decision, and it doesn't always conform to logic. But if you have an idea of where people are in their journey, you have a good idea of understanding how to talk to them about that. So you can tell I love this work. I'm really excited about answering everybody's questions. So thank you so much for having me.
And thank you, Alison, for that helpful insight into customer segmentation using data-driven customer personas. I think what Brian and Alison shared today begs this third poll question, that is, if your utility was going to invest in customer segmentation, or if you are right now, what's your primary goal with customer segmentation? Is it about customer satisfaction? Is it about engaging with customers? Is it about achieving some program conversions and participation? Or maybe it's just improving your digital communications. Let me push that out here. Relative to metrics like open rate and click-through rate, etc. So we have 4 choices for you. What would you say is or would be your energy utility's primary goal with customer segmentation? And as soon as you answer this, we'll move on and start answering some of your questions. We got some great questions I see have come in, and continue to keep those coming in. Appreciate your participation in this poll. You're all jumping on that pretty quickly. What would be your primary goal with segmentation at your utility? Obviously, any one of these would be a benefit, but what would be your primary goal? What would be that top goal that would really justify your investment in customer segmentation? Looks like most of you has answered here, so I'm going to go ahead and push the results to audience. Again, you've kind of spread your answers through all our options here, but number 1 was increasing customer engagement, followed closely by increasing customer satisfaction. So I appreciate your participation there, and we're going to go ahead and then move on to answering some of your questions. So the first question is, are AI-driven personas, do they use preset categories that the AI uses to sort patterns into customer clusters? Or if it doesn't, does the AI have the power to create personalized categories without external input? So Alison, obviously that's going to probably fall in your lap.
Yeah, I absolutely love this question. Thinking about it this way, what we're doing is separating signal from noise. And so we don't, our customers are always like, how many personas are you going to get? And we're like, we don't know until we look at the data. And we use basically these systems that treat AI-driven personas like a search problem. And it's not a search problem in like 3 dimensions. It's a search problem in n dimensions. So we're basically searching space that's equal to the size of the number of features we had. And like I said, in some cases, it's tens of thousands. And so we're looking at folding together that space and understanding basically what's most important in separating customers from each other, so building concentrated pools of customers, but also understanding who's, for example, if you're thinking about e-billing, who's going to go for that and not going to go for that. And so what we do is we fold together that space. We understand, we build a vector basically of those most important factors. And when we're done, we end up with clusters of customers. And we don't always know how many clusters is going to be. The system figures that out. And the system also figures out what are the factors that help sort everybody into those pools. So for example, we were looking at who was going to potentially buy. So, in Texas, they had that horrible freeze back in February. And so there's a lot of people starting to pick up prepaid billing when it comes to their electricity consumption, because they do not want a surprise bill. And one of the things we saw was there were a couple of factors that were really predictive around whether or not people were going to be interested in, purchasing, not only purchasing that potential product, but also how would they potentially do that. And we saw, for example, how people like to vacation was pretty predictive of how people would, for example, interact with their mail. So if, people are, regular domestic travelers, or especially people who really like cruises, which is really interesting, seem to be something that, it's not causational, because going on a cruise does not make you buy a particular product, but it was highly indicative that, this kind of customer was going to buy this particular kind of thing. And I never would have guessed that in advance. It was definitely something that was like, okay, we saw these two things being really highly linked. So if you're going to find that in the data, and the data size, the sample sizes are large enough that we know it's not, a weird sample or, something else going on. We know if you can, and, find factors like that, or the other thing that we thought was very the system found was very predictive was how people feel about environmental causes. Are they people who are frequent donators? Are they people who care about it? They were also really good candidates for those systems. So you can take those factors together and kind of, use them to predict who's going to be the right ones for the right programs.
Okay, very good. Next question is, how does one really best identify the needs, motivations, and interests of our customers? Obviously, you could use an AI-driven structure, Alison, like you have. I don't know, Brian, maybe there's data or metrics we can take from e-newsletters, but how can you dig out these needs, motivations, and interests of our customers?
Yeah, there are a few different ways that I described earlier that, based on customers' content consumption, we can see what e-newsletter articles they read and make assumptions there. If somebody is reading a lot of content about electric vehicles, they're probably interested and ready to learn more about the program. I would say, though, that kind of going back to Alison's previous answer, I think what's so powerful about the approach that she described using AI these days is a lot of times these connections aren't obvious, and so there is the approach, which I think that original question asker described, of having the predefined buckets and maybe making some assumptions about who should go in what bucket. And then there's the approach of not starting with any buckets at all and kind of letting the data guide you towards what those buckets should even be. And so I think it's really important. We can certainly get started by making those direct connections with content consumption and other behaviors, other things that we can identify about the customers, and that's a good place to start. But I think it is also important to be open to and acknowledge that there are all these other possibilities that aren't obvious, that we may never see without the help of AI and the kind of approach that Alison described.
Yeah.
Okay. Alison, this question probably would go to you. How long does it typically take to set up the Blastpoint system? It sounds awesome, but it seems like it could be a little overwhelming.
Yeah. So for us, we have a pre-built AI core, so that's the same for everybody. A lot of it's just working with our customers to connect with their data. And some of our customers, they have a data lake pre-built. They know exactly what's in there. We can generally get connected with that within a matter of just a week or two. For some of our customers, it might take a little bit longer just to discover what's in there, understand exactly what it is. But honestly, I don't think it's ever taken us longer than a month to get connected to the data, to understand the data. And usually, we want to leave everything better than we found it. So we do that data quality process where we will, for example, reconcile addresses, clean up, repeat data, find places where we can make the data more polished, and it's something that ends up being of value to the entire enterprise and usually not just the department that we're working with. For us, it's being of service to the internal IT team as much as possible, working with them. And I got to say, we've got some really wonderful people who are really amazing. I think in the utility industry, everyone seems to be like a little embarrassed by their data. And like I said before, I've always seen worse. I think that the utility industry actually does a pretty good job as a whole in having coherent, usable, digitized data. You don't want to see some of the things I've seen in the insurance industry. And so it's always a pleasure to work with people in that sector.
Okay. Next question is, I keep the questions coming in, appreciate it. How feasible is it to segment commercial and industrial customers?
I love this question. So this is like one of my favorite things because residential data and residential customers in the United States, there's like not a lot of restrictions around it. But in most of the world, so for example, we've got customers in Australia, Canada, we're looking to expand into Europe. So we have legislation that makes it, you have to be really careful when dealing with customer data. With business data, it's kind of a different story. We still want to respect and be careful with all the data we have. But with business data, man, the regulatory stuff is just like way less complicated. So it's just easier to work with. So you're able to think globally in ways that you can't necessarily with residential data. And there's tons and tons of information about businesses when they're founded, their credit ratings, their ownership, their history. And that's all really, really powerful in figuring out how to talk to business customers. There's even, all the way down to like looking at like who's in their marketing department, who's their VP of strategy, who do you have in the company? There's so much stuff to work with in that respect. And so for us, there's like an entire Canadian province out there that we help them develop their commercial EV strategy by understanding, what businesses are out there, their likelihood to adopt, for example, EV charging, both public and private. So public, I'm a movie theater, I'm a hotel, I'm trying to attract people to come and stay at my location. Or for, private charging, I'm a tech company and I have, the certain kind of employee I want to attract. So being able to look at the entirety of a province, ended up being hundreds of thousands of businesses and basically saying like, these are the ones that are going to go for it within the next couple of months. Here's who's going to go beyond that and prioritize as you need.
All right.
Yeah, I would add, Mike, I share the example of the business newsletter that we segment by industry. For your large C&I customers, those are actually probably the easiest utility customers to segment. Because you already know, you have a key account manager working with them, you already know a lot more about those customers compared to, probably most residential customers. We found, as an example, that a small business list, a list of small businesses is a lot harder to work with than a list of your large businesses that have key account managers, just because going into it, you don't know as much about them. So certainly big businesses is actually a really good and pretty straightforward place to start with segmentation because you have those relationships and you have that information already.
All right. Brian, I'm going to direct this one to you at first here. What you talked about automatically triggered messaging. What are the risks or cons of doing that? Is there any? Or
there are some. I mean, from a messaging strategy, I think I don't see a lot of risk, but from a kind of a volume perspective, there is definitely a danger. And so when you set up these mechanisms to automatically deploy, say, an email or a text in response to customer action, you want to make sure that you have some governance over that, so that, because you can imagine a scenario, say the abandoned cart email, right? Say somebody like is a really indecisive shopper and they put something in their cart, then they take it out, then they put something else in and they take it out. Like you don't, in that process of that person shopping on, say in your marketplace, you don't want to trigger 6 different abandoned cart emails, right? So when you set up a behavioral messaging system, you want to make sure that you have governance, that Not just that you're not sending the same message repeatedly, but that over time you're not, over some, say, every day or every week, you're not sending too many messages to the same person. Sometimes with that kind of behavioral messaging, it can be tantalizingly easy to set those systems up, and really important that you don't forget about them, right? That you pay close enough attention that you know the volume of messages that are going out, and making sure that in that case that the right messages or the best messages are the ones that are being selected to go out.
Okay. Just got a couple minutes left, so I got a couple more questions here I think we'd like to address. Alison, this would go to you. How does Blastpoint personas work if a company's just starting out with data resources? A lot of our legacy data is of questionable quality and can be hard to get.
Yeah, believe me, I've heard that story before. So a lot of times we work directly with the owner of the data, so that ends up usually being a member of the IT team, and so we work with them. We try and make things as easy as possible. We've got a lot of adapters that can pull things directly from any kind of customer management system, any kind of internal resource, and basically turn them into something meaningful. So if you don't have a data lake or you don't have a centralized repository of customer data, we can help you build one. We can get you something like a nice and quick and dirty version of a golden record for customers as quickly as possible. I think a lot of people hesitate because they think that what they have isn't good enough. And you'd be surprised how little you need to actually get started. So going back to my Canadian province where we were working with electrical vehicle data, we were working with a utility with a regulated and unregulated side, which meant they could not share data. So it meant that we started with zero data, and we ended up working with them to acquire third-party data that would make sense in context of the project. So even if you have nothing, there are ways to start and build things. And if you have, if you're mailing people stuff, and you're, I know there's not a guy like penciling everybody's address like in your mailroom. That's not happening. So even if you just have a system that does that, it's something that we can talk to, and it's definitely a starting place for this kind of thing. Billing information systems especially are really, really rich places to get really good information, high quality data on customers. And it doesn't have to go back a lot in time. Like I know a lot of organizations are undergoing transformational change when it comes to data resources. So, what you have now might not resemble what you had in 2011. Well, you don't have to go back that far to get value. So, even just 2 years can be really, really highly predictive of customer behavior and help set a baseline of what you need for your initiative.
Okay. Well, we've run out of time today, so if we missed addressing your question during the webinar, we'll certainly follow up offline. But I'd like to answer our last poll for today. How useful was this information presented in the webinar? Really appreciate your feedback on that. And while you're doing that, let me finish with a quick recap of what I think we heard today. So I think what we heard is there are huge benefits to customer segmentation, including greater customer engagement, and also greater participation in programs like paperless billing, for instance. I think we saw that also segmentation is really not the same as personalization, but they do go hand in hand. I think what we learned also is that behavioral messaging is widely used outside of the utility industry. So it's really a proven approach to achieving these other goals, and it's widely used. In addition to that, I think there are several barriers to customer segmentation which were identified today. Things like email list quality and available content, lack of internal resources, just not knowing where to start, for instance. And finally, a couple other things I think. One is that AI-driven personas tell utilities about past behavior, but can also predict future behavior. And finally, personas can be used, I think, by many different departments, including marketing, sales, customer service, new product development, really across the board. So with that, I'm going to just say thank you to our great speakers today, Brian and Alison, for your excellent insights from your experience with digital customer engagement. Of course, thank you, audience, as well, for attending today and your great questions. But now let's hear some closing comments from Maureen.
Thanks, Mike, and I would like to thank all of you for attending our webinar today. As a reminder, the presentation materials and the playback link to the recording of today's webinar will be emailed to you within the next couple of days. Should you have additional questions or feedback, please don't hesitate to contact us. Remember to also keep June 17th open for our next webinar, where we will discuss the resurgence of e-newsletters and what it means for your utility. Thanks again for attending, and have a great day, everyone.